What if everything you've been told about death is not the complete truth? What if behind the comforting stories of the afterlife lies a much deeper reality than anything you've been led to believe? What if death doesn't set you free, but recycles you? Most people never dare to ask these questions. They follow the path laid out before them, believing they're walking toward freedom, when in truth they may be entering the oldest trap in the cosmos. Helena Blavatsky, that enigmatic figure of the 19th century, dared to pull back this veil. This Russian-born mystic, who traversed continents in search of hidden wisdom, uncovered a startling truth that powerful institutions have worked for millennia to suppress: the Demiurge's trap. The Gnostics whispered about this long ago. They claimed that the world itself was not the creation of a loving God, but of an impostor, an arrogant architect, a false ruler known as the Demiurge. And according to them, this same being has constructed an infinite wheel of birth and death, a cycle of reincarnation that funnels souls back into this matrix reality. But here's the most important question. If the afterlife is a trap, then what happens to you when you die? And more importantly, how do you escape it? This isn't the kind of knowledge you'll find in a Sunday sermon or a glossy packaged self-help book. It isn't the New Age movement's story of love and light. This is knowledge that has been suppressed, buried, and branded as heresy. Because if too many souls remembered this, the prison itself would begin to crumble. In this video, we'll explore how the Gnostics understood death not as a gateway to freedom, but as the moment when the soul could be captured and recycled. You'll see why they believed reincarnation is not the path to spiritual progress we've been told, but the very mechanism of the trap and the hidden signs that reveal when you're being lured back into it. Most people will never hear this. Most will continue walking toward the light, not knowing who built it or why. If you're enjoying this content, subscribe to the channel and leave your like, because it helps tremendously to continue bringing content like this. Perhaps the Demiurge's prison isn't confined to this world, but extends beyond death itself, a hall of mirrors, tricking your soul into returning again and again, repeating life after life. Long before our modern religions took shape, the ancient world was alive with whispers of hidden realms, rival gods, and secret knowledge. Among these, the Gnostics offered a warning unlike any other. In the caves of the Nag Hammadi Desert in Egypt, hidden until their discovery in 1945, lay texts that shattered the comfortable stories told by priests and emperors. These were the Gnostic writings, fragments of a spiritual tradition that dared to say, "The world you see around you is not the true creation of the real God." The Gnostics spoke of a higher realm, the pleroma, where pure light and consciousness dwell. From this fullness emerged Sophia, the embodiment of divine wisdom. However, in her longing to create on her own, moved by curiosity, by desire, by a solitary act apart from the source, she brought forth a flawed being, the Demiurge. The Demiurge, ignorant of the greater realms above him, declared himself the only God. He molded matter into a vast, glittering prison, populating it with archons, cosmic wardens who rule over the planets, stars, and cycles of human life. Here lies the heart of the Gnostic warning. According to them, the soul was not meant for endless cycling between birth and death. True life belongs to the eternal realms of light, not in the shadows of this material world. Yet the Demiurge's system recycles souls, binding them to the wheel of reincarnation, so they continue to feed his dominion. This claim was radical for its time. In nearly every religion of the ancient world, whether the pagan cults of Rome or the rising Christian church, death was portrayed as a passage to divine reward or punishment. But the Gnostics dared to say something far more disturbing, that death itself might be the trap. Other traditions carried echoes of this. In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, known as the Bardo Thodol, the soul is warned of dazzling lights and illusions that appear after death, designed to lure it back to rebirth. Even the early Christian thinker Origen entertained the idea of pre-existence and cycles of embodiment, teachings later condemned as heresy. But why such eagerness to erase these teachings? Because the fear of death is the strongest chain of all, and once a soul breaks it, it slips beyond control. A soul convinced it must return to learn lessons over and over is a soul unlikely to rebel. But a soul that remembers it was never meant to be imprisoned, that it belongs to eternity, becomes dangerous. dangerous not just to the rulers of this world, but to the Demiurge himself. The Gnostics saw themselves as exiles, wanderers in a counterfeit creation carrying the spark of forgotten origin. Their mission was not to perfect the cycle, but to break free from it. And their texts offered enigmatic instructions on how the awakened could navigate death without falling into the luminous traps of the Demiurge. From which city in the United States are you watching this, or from which country in the world is this content reaching you? Leave it in the comments. I really want to know. And here is the deepest question. If the reincarnation cycle is a prison, how is it maintained? How does the Demiurge ensure that almost every soul keeps returning? And what signs reveal when you're being pulled back into his system? The answer may expose not just the hidden motives of ancient religion, but also the illusions woven into today's New Age movement. Helena Blavatsky understood this cosmic deception. Having studied with masters in Tibet, India, and Egypt, she recognized the same pattern across cultures: the recycling of souls, the false light, the cosmic amnesia. She called it the eternal prisoner, and in her monumental work, The Secret Doctrine, she traced its origins to the dawn of human consciousness. When your last breath leaves your body, when the world of form dissolves and suddenly you're weightless, free of pain, floating in a vast, luminous expanse, what happens next? According to countless near-death experience stories, the first thing you see is a light, radiant, irresistible. It draws you closer. Loved ones appear smiling, calling your name. A warmth fills you, and for a moment, you're certain that this is it. Heaven, this is home. But the Gnostics would interrupt this scene with a warning. Beware, soul, for not all that shines is light. According to their vision, what many call the afterlife is often the opening gate of the cycle. The tunnel of light is a construct, a luminous lure woven by the archons to recycle you back into the cycle of death and rebirth. The comforting voices may not be your ancestors, but projections, illusions created to keep you from questioning where you really are. The Gnostic texts never use the modern phrase reincarnation trap, but they warned that souls, if deceived, could be captured and cast back into new bodies. Why? Because the Demiurge's system feeds on return. Each time you incarnate, you forget who you are. Each life erases the memory of your divine origin. And while you struggle with pain, desire, fear, and distraction, the archons tighten their hold. In today's language, this is exactly what many would call the wheel of reincarnation. Think of it as a cosmic game of hypnosis. The moment you die, you wake briefly, only to be lulled back to sleep. Just as a dream vanishes when you wake up, the memory of your soul's freedom vanishes when you return to the body. The Gnostic texts often describe this in symbolic terms. The hypostasis of the archons speaks of rulers who bind humanity in forgetfulness. The Apocryphon of John describes how the Demiurge shaped the soul's prison, surrounding it with layers of deception. The Pistis Sophia hints at the perilous journey of the soul through realms of judgment and false lights. And yet ask yourself this: why does the light appear so irresistible? Why do souls return so willingly? Here lies the genius of the illusion. It appeals to your deepest longing, the desire to be safe, to be loved, to belong, to reunite with Source. What better bait than the faces of those you cherished in life? What stronger tether than the promise of reunion? But the Gnostics insisted on vigilance. They believed that beyond the false light dwells a greater radiance, the true light of the pleroma that cannot be counterfeited. In their cosmology, that radiance belongs to the aeons, divine emanations of the Source, streams of living light flowing from the pleroma. To know the difference between the false glare and the true light of the aeons was, for the Gnostics, the very key to liberation. The difference is subtle but profound. The false light dazzles and demands, while the true light awakens and liberates. That's why they spoke of gnosis, direct, inner knowing, remembrance. Because without awareness, how would you know the difference? If this is making sense to you, comment your opinion below and share this video. Helena Blavatsky, in her penetrating wisdom, recognized this distinction. In Isis Unveiled, she wrote about the astral light, a reflected, illusory radiance that captivates the unprepared soul. She cautioned against mistaking this reflected light for the true spiritual sun. Drawing from ancient Egyptian, Hindu, and Tibetan sources, she described the journey of the soul through what she called the Kama Loka, a realm of desire and illusion where many souls become entangled after death, mistaking it for their final destination. And so the question deepens. If the Demiurge's trap lures the soul with comfort and illusion, then how does the cycle of reincarnation actually unfold? What forces pull you back into the prison of flesh? And what role does karma and judgment really play? Unraveling these questions may reveal the very knowledge the Gnostics guarded as sacred and open before you, the hidden path to freedom. If the first part of the illusion is seduction, the dazzling light, the false reunion, then the second part is entanglement. The Gnostics taught that after death, the soul does not wander freely. Instead, it encounters powers, the archons, who act as gatekeepers. These forces question, judge, and weigh the soul, not to guide it toward liberation, but to bind it more firmly to the cycle of matter. You've heard the phrase, life review. Countless near-death experiences describe having your actions shown to you, feeling your emotions repeated, and being told you must learn more lessons. But here's the hidden question. Who is conducting this review? The Gnostics would say this judgment doesn't come from the true source, but from the false rulers of this world. Judgment, even when it seems to come from the soul itself, is still part of the illusion. By convincing the soul that it has failed, that it must return to correct its mistakes, the archons ensure that the cycle of reincarnation never ends. Perhaps the real hell isn't fire and torment at all, but something else entirely. Perhaps the real hell is returning to Earth repeatedly, reliving life without ever truly ascending. Think of it as a cosmic courtroom where the judge, jury, and prosecutor are all part of the same system. You're convinced of your guilt, sentenced to return, and told it's for your growth, when in reality it's for your containment. And what about karma? In the Gnostic perspective, karma isn't divine justice, but programming, a set of strings and weights that pull the soul back to density. Each action creates echoes, yes, but the system is designed to entangle you in these echoes, to keep you orbiting the same loops. It appears like a school, but is actually a cage. Here lies the radical departure from other traditions. Hinduism and Buddhism teach that reincarnation is a path of learning leading ultimately to liberation. But the Gnostics flip the script. Reincarnation itself is the problem. Liberation doesn't come from playing the game well, but from refusing to play it altogether. That's why they spoke of remembering secret words, hidden names, and divine seals, mystical passwords that allowed the awakened soul to bypass the archons. The first apocalypse of James describes how the soul, upon encountering these rulers, should not cower but declare its origin in the realms of light. Only then can it ascend beyond their reach. So here's the paradox. The cycle is maintained through ignorance, but the key is remembrance. The more you identify with the roles you've played, this body, this personality, this story, the easier it is to be recycled. But when you remember that your essence comes from beyond the stars, beyond the Demiurge's domain, the illusion begins to waver and dissolve completely. Helena Blavatsky understood this cosmic machinery intimately. She called it the law of periodicity, not as divine justice, but as a mechanism of spiritual gravity. In The Key to Theosophy, she explained that most souls return not because they must, but because they don't know any better. The desire nature, what she termed the kamic principle, pulls them back to familiar experiences. Like iron filings to a magnet, souls are drawn to what they recognize, what they crave, what they fear. Blavatsky's brilliance lay in synthesizing Eastern and Western esoteric traditions to reveal this pattern. She recognized that both the Egyptian Book of the Dead and the Tibetan Bardo Thodol were maps for the same territory, the soul's journey through the afterlife gauntlet. How many times have you felt déjà vu, as if you've lived this life before? How often have you felt that the world itself is scripted, looping, staged? Perhaps these aren't just quirks of memory or what people call glitches in the matrix, but ripples of the cycle, echoes of the trap itself. The question then isn't just what the trap is, but how to escape it. How does an awakened soul navigate death without being drawn back to the wheel? The Gnostics believed the answer to this might be their most important teaching of all. At the crossroads between worlds stands a moment of ultimate choice, what the Gnostics called the crisis, the judgment, the point where paths diverge. This is where light meets shadow, truth confronts illusion, and freedom challenges imprisonment. After the seduction of the false light and the entanglement of judgment comes the crucial turning point. The soul faces a decision that will determine whether it continues cycling through incarnations or breaks free into the greater expanse of the pleroma. This is where Helena Blavatsky's wisdom becomes most profound. Drawing from her studies with Tibetan masters, she described what happens at this critical juncture. In The Secret Doctrine, she wrote of a moment when the soul must choose between the luminous path to nirvana and the downward path to material rebirth. This choice is not made with words or thoughts, but through the soul's deepest recognition of its true nature. Most souls, she observed, fail this test. Drawn by familiarity, comfort, and unresolved attachments, they turn toward the false light. They accept the judgment of the archons. They believe the story that they must return to learn more lessons, resolve more karma, develop more virtues. And in that acceptance, they reset the cycle. But some souls, those who have cultivated awareness during life, those who have remembered their divine origin, recognize the deception. They see beyond the dazzling light to the greater radiance of the pleroma. They recognize the archons not as divine judges, but as gatekeepers of a prison. And in that recognition, something shifts. The Pistis Sophia, a Gnostic text, describes this moment as the soul declaring its freedom. I am a child of the light. I come from the place where the light dwells without being contained. I come from the place where the light has cast its roots. This declaration is not mere words, but the soul's deepest recognition of its nature. It's a flame that burns away illusion. It's the moment when the soul remembers not just who it is, but where it came from and where it truly belongs. Blavatsky called this the awakening of Buddhi, the spiritual soul recognizing itself beyond the veil of Maya, the cosmic illusion. She taught that this recognition must begin in life, through meditation, contemplation, and the cultivation of what she called the higher intuition. The more you practice seeing beyond illusion while alive, the more likely you'll recognize deception when facing death. If this content is opening your mind, subscribe now to the channel to not miss the next chapters of this journey. The turning point is not just a moment after death, but a preparation that begins now. Every time you question reality, every time you seek truth beyond appearances, you're strengthening the soul's discernment. You're preparing for the ultimate test, the moment when everything you've believed about death, about God, about reality itself, will be challenged. The depth of the deception goes further still. Beyond the false light, beyond the judgment, beyond even the turning point, lies a secret so carefully guarded that few spiritual traditions dare speak of it directly. The Gnostics called it the Great Forgetting. The Buddhists named it the Wheel of Samsara. Helena Blavatsky referred to it as the mist of matter. But all point to the same hidden truth. This isn't your first time in this trap. This isn't your second or your 100th. The cycle of forgetting and returning has been happening for what might be thousands of lifetimes. Each time you forget. Each time you believe the story anew. Each time you walk toward the light, thinking it leads to freedom, only to find yourself back in the density of flesh, crying your first breath beginning again. The real power of the system isn't in preventing escape. It's in making you forget there's anything to escape from. Think of it as a cosmic memory wipe. Each incarnation erases the knowledge of previous cycles. Each birth pulls a veil over the soul's eyes. You enter this world not as a blank slate, but as an amnesiac, a being with a vast history you cannot remember. Plato hinted at this in his myth of air, where souls drink from the river of unmindfulness before returning to earth. The Hermetic texts speak of souls drunken with matter, forgetting their divine origin. The Upanishads describe the soul covered by 5 sheaths that obscure its true nature. But it was Helena Blavatsky who systematized this understanding. Drawing from sources across civilizations, she constructed a comprehensive view of how the forgetting occurs. In The Secret Doctrine, she describes 7 principles of the human being, with each incarnation rebuilding the lower 5 principles, while the higher 2, Buddhi and Atma, the spiritual soul and divine spark, remain untouched but veiled from awareness. This veiling isn't accidental. It's the central mechanism of control, because a soul that remembers cannot be enslaved. a soul that knows its origin cannot be deceived, a soul that recognizes the false light will not walk toward it. That's why mystics in every tradition have emphasized the same core practice: remembrance. The Gnostic practice of anamnesis, unforgetting, the Buddhist mindfulness, the Hindu self-inquiry, the Sufi zikr, all are techniques to pierce the veil of forgetting, to remember what we truly are before it's too late. The secret teachings suggested specific practices: meditation focusing on the origin of consciousness, contemplation of symbols that bypass the rational mind to speak directly to the soul, and sacred sounds or mantras that resonate with the higher frequencies of being. Like this video right now, it helps tremendously to spread this message. Blavatsky brought these practices to the Western world through her Theosophical Society, teaching that regular meditation on the higher self could gradually thin the veil between ordinary consciousness and spiritual awareness. She insisted this wasn't merely a philosophical exercise, but practical preparation for the moment of death, training the soul to recognize the deception when it comes. The deepest deception isn't just that there is a trap, but that you've been caught in it before, perhaps countless times. The most hidden secret isn't just that there's a way out, but that you've been searching for it across lifetimes. And now, perhaps, the forgetting is beginning to lift. The trap hasn't changed, but its disguise has evolved. In our modern world, the Demiurge's system doesn't present itself in religious language or mythic imagery. It has adapted to contemporary consciousness, wrapping the same deception in new, more acceptable forms. Today's spiritual marketplace is filled with teachings about reincarnation, karma, and soul lessons. The New Age movement presents the cycle of rebirth as a school, a system of growth and evolution. We're told we choose to return to Earth to learn lessons, fulfill soul contracts, and ascend through densities of consciousness. But Helena Blavatsky, were she alive today, would recognize this as a sophisticated rebranding of the same trap. Consider how the modern spiritual narrative mirrors the Archon's deception. You have lessons to learn. You have karma to balance. You chose this life for your growth. These ideas sound empowering, but they serve the same function as the afterlife judgment, convincing the soul it must return to the wheel. Even the modern near-death experience accounts, with their reports of life reviews and loving beings of light instructing souls to return, match precisely what the Gnostics warned about. The script hasn't changed, only the interpretation. Blavatsky foresaw this evolution of the trap. In her writings, she cautioned against what she called psychism, fascination with astral phenomena, and comforting spiritual narratives that ultimately keep the soul bound to lower planes. She distinguished sharply between true spiritual awakening and the astral intoxication that merely creates a more pleasant form of imprisonment. Today, this warning is more relevant than ever. Our culture has moved from fearing death to romanticizing the afterlife, from dreading judgment to embracing lessons. But the outcome remains the same: souls returning to the wheel, convinced they're progressing when they're simply circling. Look at how contemporary spiritual teachings emphasize soul growth through multiple lifetimes, rather than liberation from the cycle itself. Notice how popular books on the afterlife describe beautiful realms where souls plan their next incarnation, choosing new challenges for their evolution. This isn't freedom, it's a gilded cage. The modern illusion is more dangerous because it's more subtle. It doesn't threaten with hell, it seduces with growth. It doesn't frighten with punishment, it entices with purpose. And in doing so, it maintains the Demiurge's system while making the prisoners believe they're on a journey. Helena Blavatsky's penetrating insight cuts through these comfortable illusions. She taught that true liberation doesn't come through endless refinement within the system, but through recognizing that the entire framework is a construct, and then transcending it completely. What would you do if you knew? If in the moment after death, as the light appears before you and loved ones beckon, you suddenly remembered that this is the trap, what choice would you make? This is not a hypothetical question. It's the very choice the Gnostics believed each soul faces, though most face it unconsciously, without preparation, without remembrance. You stand at the crossroads. One path leads back to the familiar cycle. Return to Earth, forget again, live another life in the dense realm of matter. The other path leads beyond, into uncertainty perhaps, into the unknown. but also into freedom. The Gnostics described this choice through symbolic imagery. In the Apocryphon of John, the liberated soul turns away from the archons and their promises, refusing their light and their judgment. Instead, it ascends toward what they called the treasury of light, the true spiritual realms beyond the Demiurge's creation. Helena Blavatsky framed this choice differently, but pointed to the same reality. In The Voice of the Silence, she wrote of two paths that open before the soul, the open path of liberation and the secret path of returning to help others. But critically, both paths require first escaping the wheel of compulsory rebirth. Either choice begins with recognizing the trap. This recognition isn't intellectual. It's not about believing a teaching or accepting a doctrine. It's about direct knowing, gnosis, that comes from the deepest part of your being. It's remembering what you've always known but forgotten, that you don't belong to this system, that your true home lies beyond it, that you are not a subject of the demiurge, but a child of the pleroma. And here is where your current life takes on profound significance. Every moment of awareness, every instance of questioning reality, every act of seeing beyond illusion is preparation for this ultimate choice. You're not just living a life, you're training a soul. The practices that matter most aren't complex rituals or elaborate ceremonies. They're simple but powerful acts of remembrance, meditation that focuses on your true nature beyond body and personality, contemplation of who you really are beneath the stories and identities, questioning the nature of reality itself and seeing through its constructs. Comment your view below. I really want to read what you think. And you, which path would you choose? Would you recognize the false light for what it is? Would you have the courage to turn away from what seems safe and familiar toward what is truly free? This isn't just an ancient teaching or a philosophical speculation. It's the most practical question you may ever face. Will you continue in the cycle, or will you remember enough to break free? As we approach the ultimate threshold of this journey, we must confront the most challenging question. How will you know? When the moment comes and you face the light, how will you distinguish between the false radiance of the demiurge and the true light of liberation? The Gnostic texts offer cryptic guidance. The Gospel of Philip speaks of recognition. Those who are sons of the bridal chamber have just one name: rest. The Apocryphon of John describes a state of knowing beyond thought. I knew, and I was at rest. This isn't ordinary knowledge. It's not information or belief. It's recognition at the level of being, what the soul knows when all illusions fall away. Helena Blavatsky expanded on this understanding. In her extensive studies of death practices across traditions, she identified consistent patterns in how awakened beings navigate the afterlife journey. From the Egyptian Book of the Dead to the Tibetan Bardo Thodol, she found the same essential wisdom. The key is not to be drawn to external lights or voices, but to recognize the light of consciousness within. In The Secret Doctrine, she wrote that at the moment of death, the soul that has prepared properly becomes united with its higher self, and the radiance of Atma Buddhi, the spiritual self, is experienced not as an external light, but as one's very essence. This distinction is crucial. The false light appears as something separate from you, a radiance you move toward, a destination outside yourself. The true light is recognized as what you already are, your essential nature revealed when the veils of forgetting are lifted. The final test, then, isn't about making the right choice. It's about remembering who you truly are. When you recognize your own nature as identical with the light of consciousness itself, the trap dissolves. There is no external light to follow because you are the light. This is why the most profound spiritual practices focus on self-knowledge, not accumulating information about the cosmos, but recognizing your true nature within it. It's why meditation in its deepest form isn't about achieving states or having experiences, but about recognizing the aware presence that is already here, that has always been here, that will still be here when the body falls away. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. The final confrontation isn't with archons or judgments or choices. It's with the fundamental illusion of separation, the belief that you are something separate from the source, that you need to return somewhere, that you need to become something you're not already. When this illusion dissolves, so does the entire trap. The Demiurge's system depends on souls believing they are separate, incomplete, in need of lessons and growth. What happens when a soul remembers its completeness? Beyond the trap, beyond the cycle, beyond even liberation itself, lies a truth so simple, yet so profound, that words can only point toward it. You were never truly captured. The real you, the essence beyond name and form, was never imprisoned in the Demiurge's system. What we call liberation is actually remembrance. It's not achieving something new, but recognizing what has always been the case. Your deepest nature is already free, already complete, already home. The Gnostics expressed this in their concept of the divine spark, the uncreated light of consciousness that dwells within, untouched by the darkness of the material world. Helena Blavatsky called it Atma, the highest principle of being that remains pure even while its rays are refracted through the prisms of mind, emotion, and body. This recognition doesn't wait for death. It can happen here, now, in this very life. Every time you look beyond appearances to the reality beneath, every time you question who you really are, every time you rest in awareness itself rather than its contents, you're touching this truth. The greatest secret isn't how to escape after death. It's that awakening can happen in the midst of life. The prison walls are made of thought, of identification, of forgetting. And they begin to dissolve the moment you turn your attention to what lies beyond them. Helena Blavatsky's most revolutionary teaching wasn't about cosmology or hidden history. It was about the possibility of self-realization in the present moment, recognition of your true nature that transforms not just your understanding of life, but your experience of death when it comes. If you followed until here, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share in the comments what struck you most in this journey. The journey doesn't end at the grave. What comes next is a test of memory, courage, and recognition. But with each moment of awareness in this life, you're preparing for that test. You're remembering what most forget. You're awakening to what most sleep through. And perhaps when the moment comes and the light appears, you will recognize it for what it is. And in that recognition, find the freedom that has always been yours.